We are going to build this beautiful website using React and Spline.
Hi everyone, I'm Willie, a front-end developer at Design Plus Code.
Today, I will show you an amazing 3D tool where you can design 3D. 3D web design allows you to stand out from the crowd, creating more engaging interfaces and evoke emotions. However, it must be done responsibly so that performance issues do not arise. This course is completely free thanks to Spline's sponsorship. Spline is a full-fledged 3D tool that is widely considered the Figma of 3D tools. It has everything you'd expect in a modern design tool: simple interface, real-time collaboration, a library of sample files, and it works in the browser, which means compatible with Mac, Windows, and tablets. It even has interactions and code export. They even have game controls, which allows users to move an object around the scene with collisions. Spline lets you manage states, events, and animations around the scene from the editor. Current 3D technologies like Blender or Cinema 4D are challenging to use because of their high price tag and intimidating learning curve. They demand in-depth technical expertise to apply on a site. For interactions such as hover, drag, scroll, and keyboard shortcuts, you would need a framework like Three.js and a lot of code. With this course, we will add states and events to animate the scene, and using these states, we will also create nice interactions. Spline has an integrated game controls that allows users to manipulate objects around a scene with collisions. We will also learn how to fully animate the character. Spline recently released its physics features, which allows objects to be affected by gravity. We will learn about cameras and how to utilize them to view the scene from a different angle. It is also possible to create a night scene in Spline within a few minutes. There is also an integrated sound library where you can use sounds and trigger them using events. The most impressive feature in Spline is probably how easy it is to export your work. We will recreate this beautiful web design from Figma to a React website. The buttons are interactive, but as well as the scene. When you click on the play game, it goes to full screen, and it is also adaptive to mobile or tablet. You can download Spline for Mac, Windows, or Linux. You can also use it directly in the browser, which is convenient on the go and on devices like the iPad. Many of these beautiful 3D assets are also thought from scratch in their YouTube channel. Here are some examples of how you can make a website with Spline. You can see that on the scene we have two objects, and the laptop changes the camera angle, and when you click on the coffee it goes back. And here's another one. There's some hover animation, but you can also scroll. I hope you are excited to build this awesome scene with me. Let's get started, and I'll see you on the next one. Let's talk about states, events, and animations. Creating 3D animations can be challenging and do not allow interactions or UI prototyping. By using Spline, you can create beautiful interactive experiences and make this process approachable. Spline animations are state-based animations, which means that each object has a base state and another state. And using events, you can trigger these animations between states. In order to follow this course, you need to download the assets file, which includes the template Spline file. So here's a link to download the template, and I will also add it in the description below. This scene was designed by Axen Vadi, one of Design Code's designers. The camera is showing us inside a house from an isometric angle. We are going to begin by making things interactive as soon as possible. Our first step will be to open the drawers. So first, select the second floor, and here select the nightstand 2 and the first one. To zoom in, we can click here, apply it 400%, and also center an object. To add a state, click on the plus icon next to state. And this will create a base state, which is the initial values. And we want the drawer to be close, so we won't change these values. Select state, and in here, we're going to set the position Z to 33. And now you can see that the drawer is open. You can even preview manually by switching between these states. So on the top left side, we can search for drawers, and we already did this one. So on the second one, I will add a state and set the position Z to 33. On the nightstand 1, I will add a state to the drawer 1 and change the position Z to 33 as well. And on the drawer 2. Here, you can see that we have the drawers for the TV stand. This one, I will add a state, but change the Z position to 25 instead. Repeat the same steps for the 2 and the 3. Now we're going to talk about events. Events are basically the triggers to your states. It enables your object to move between states with controls or gestures. Let's add an event to the first drawer. Select the object, and on the inspector panel, click on the plus icon next to events. Select, and now you will see a drop-down menu with multiple events. I will go fairly quickly on this list. So the start triggers when the scene is loaded. The mouse up triggers when the mouse is released. The mouse down triggers when the mouse is pressed. Mouse hover triggers when the mouse floats the object. Key up triggers when the key is released. Key down triggers when the key is pressed. Play sound triggers sound. Scroll triggers when scrolled. Look at changes the angle of the object to follow the mouse. Follow changes the position of the object to follow the mouse. And game controls enables game controls on an object. In our case, we will select mouse down. Make sure the toggle is set to yes, because we want to be able to close and open the drawer. And below is the objects section. Here you can select the object and you can change the properties in this drop-down menu. I will give a brief explanation for each properties. So the target is the object affected by the event. And here are only objects with states that are added to events. Then we have change to, which is the selected state to transition to which state. Then we have transition, duration, delay, and delay repeat, which is the different ways to transition between states. In our case, I will choose the transition to be linear with a duration of 0.5 seconds. Make sure to apply the same event to the other drawers. So the second one with a mouse down toggle, here linear with a duration of 0.5 seconds. On the first one as well. On the second drawer of the first nightstand. And the drawers for the TV stand. With that done, let's talk about play mode. The play mode allows you to preview your scene. On the top bar, click on the play icon over here. And now we can play with what we just did. So we can click on the drawers and you can see that it is transitioning between the two different states. As you can see, It is very easy to create interactions in Spline. Using these two techniques, we will animate more elements in our scene. Next, we will also animate the sliding door. So select here. Let's center an object at 200%. In order to make the door slide, we need to change its Z position. So we need to use another kind of gesture, and this time we are going to use mouse hover. So select this layer and we're going to put a state. This one, we will set the Z position to 154. So if we click on the base state, it is closed and the state is open. Here in event, we're going to add a mouse hover. This one will have a transition of ease in and out with a duration of 1. So let's play and check it out. Next, we will animate the TV. So select the TV, let's center an object at 200, and here you'll see a screen layer. The screen layer already has an image, but you can totally upload your own if you wish. So let's add a state. The base state, the image will be at 0 opacity, and then let's set this one at 100. And that way, when we click on it, it's going to show the image. For the event, we're going to select mouse down with a toggle. So let's test it out. The last object to animate is the iMac, which is located behind the sliding doors. To access it, we have to rotate the scene. So click here. And by holding Option and drag on the screen, you can hand-free the camera. Select the iMac. I will center an object at 200%. And similar to the TV, we're going to select the screen layer, add a state, and set the state to 100 on the image. Then we're going to select the iMac, and this is where we're adding the gesture. So add an event, which is mouse down, toggle it, and to preview, you will see that the camera will be using the isometric camera. So in export, make sure to select the camera to personal camera. The personal camera is this actual angle. So play and let's test it out. So it is not working, and I believe it is because this mouse down event is targeting the iMac and not the actual screen. So let's test right now, and it is working. Make sure to put back the camera to isometric. After all that is completed, our scene will look much nicer, but we will add one last feature. We are not really sure what is interactive in the scene at the moment, so we will change the color of the interactive elements using the mouse hover control. For example, each drawer has a cover, so we're going to target the cover of each drawers and set a different color on hover. So let's start with the second floor, and I will select the first cover. Here, I will set the state, and we already added the color over here, so I will just add the opacity to 100. You can put any color that you want, but you have to be consistent throughout your scene. When this is done, I will add an event with a mouse hover on that specific cover. I will set the duration to 0.5 seconds. So now let's apply it to the other covers. So this nightstand is done. Let's work on this cover. Same for the one below. And for the drawers, we are going to add the state on the covers, but the actual event on the drawer. So here you can see that it was white, so I set it to the color. So on the drawer, I'm going to add the hover effect. This one will target the cover 1 TV at 0.5 seconds. This one will add a state, will change the color, and on its parent, I will add the mouse hover event targeting the cover 2 TV. And finally, the third cover. Now let's enter play mode and test our interaction. When you hover on each jar, we know that they are interactive. For the sliding door, we're going to select the sliding door 2 and sliding door paper layer. Let's add a state, and here instead of changing the color, we're going to set the opacity to 70. Then on the sliding door group, we're going to add an event, which is the hover, and here make sure to select the sliding door paper 2 with an opacity of 0.5. So let's test it out. So when you hover on the group, this one is animated, and then when we hover on that one, the sliding doors pushes. For the TV, we're going to select the hover layer. So here there's a hover. Let's add a state, and on the color, we're going to set it to 40. And in here on the TV, we're going to add the hover event. So mouse hover, and make sure that we're selecting the hover state. Let's set the duration to 0.3 and let's play. Lastly, for the iMac, it is very similar to the TV. So let's select it. It has a hover layer. So on this one, add a state and set the color to 40%. When this is done, select the iMac and we're going to add another event. Select mouse hover. Make sure that it is selecting the hover object, and in here, we're going to set 0.3 second. Before playing, make sure that your export camera is personal camera. Let's play and hover. Let's talk about movement and controls. The web is full of game frameworks, such as gdevelop, Phaser.js, and Pixie.js. They do a great job developing web games, but there are a few limitations, such as the need to learn code and the fact that it is in 2D. With Spline, you get 3D, a simple learning curve with minimal code implementation and an editor. In most games, controlling your character and manipulating the speed and acceleration of your character is essential, and you need to code that feature most of the time. And all of these features are available right from the start thanks to Spline's team. In Spline, adding game controls is really easy. First, select the object that will be your character. In our case, is the cat. Then, in event, add a new event and select game controls. From that, you will be able to control your character. So let's enter play mode, and now you can use the WSAD key to move your character around, space to jump, and the arrow key to rotate your scene. Now, let's talk about movement. In this section, you can move or make the character fly, as well as adjusting its position, rotation, speed, and delay. We are going to set the position speed to 200 because earlier we saw that the cat was moving way too fast. And then let's talk about the auto orient. When it comes to auto orient on isometric scene, we need to use a small trick to get it work. Here on the cat, you see that we have these rotation values set, and then on the body we have these ones. And basically you need to use this trick to make the isometric character move properly. When it is on a normal 3D scene, it works without using the rotations. Here's an example of what happened to the cat when we choose the fly movement. Enter play mode. By using the WASD keys, you can see that the cat is moving but is not affected by gravity. Then we have the desktop controls. You can determine what keys will control your character and what each one will do. The rotate by enables the camera's rotation by mouse, keys, or both. The keyboard keys can be assigned a new key or another function. So if you click on the W, you see that the W key has move forward. If you click here, you see that there's a drop down with multiple functions. If you're not happy with this key, you can select W and assign, let's say, T instead. On the right side, we have this icon. This is the reset icon. This will reset all the changes. And this is how you customize your control to move your character. The next section is the touch controls. But right before that, we need to talk about the multiple game controls events, which means that what happens when we have two objects with game controls. So here I will copy and paste the cat. Now we have a cat 2. And if you select the game controls of the second cat, you see that we have this warning. There will only be one game controls events in your scene where desktop and mobile controls can be defined. If you have multiple game controls events, this warning will appear every time you edit a new game control events, notifying you that it is not the main one. It is always possible to change the controls from the main button by pressing this button. You can customize your experience using touch controls on touch-based devices, such as iPhone and iPad, and you can enable or disable this option. Then we have rotate by, which lets you choose between dragging the screen or use a joystick to rotate. Right below, this is the position of your joysticks. Each point is a different position, so you can drag them and then move them. Then we have the offset, which is the space between the controls and the screen edge. The button size is the size of the button, and the visibility is the selected button is shown or hidden. Let's talk about collision detection. Collision detection is a concept that exists in many games. This enables you to trigger a variety of events based on two objects touching. In our case, it is the character with the ground or the object around it. It incorporates a parcel of things such as colliders, gravity, force of your jumps, and etc. Spline made this highlight amazingly simple to utilize on their editor. You will see a yellow outline around your object when you zoom in. You can use this to define the boundaries of your character with the selected shape. In game controls, you will enable the collision option right underneath the touch controls. The collider is the boundaries of your character, and here you can choose between the capsule or the sphere. We will be using the capsule since our cat is not exactly round. You can see here that we are missing a little bit of the legs and the ears. So on the size, set the radius to 37 and the height to 94. Like that, we just included a bit more of the tails, the ears, and the rest of the legs. Depending on the shape of your character, the collider's position and rotation will vary. The collider can be show or hide. Gravity is the force applied to your character, and we will keep it at -10. If this value is positive, the object will float. And as we saw earlier, the character was jumping really high, so we're going to set the value of the jump to 50. Using a reset Y position, the character position can be reset when it goes outside its bounds. So let's test it right now. Let's play. So you see that the running speed is a lot better and the jumping as well. The reset Y position is basically this. When you go out of bound, our character is able to move around. So let's set this value to -200. Play again. And now you can see that every single time that the cat is out of bound, it resets. We're going to animate the cat. There are multiple body parts on the cat, including the tail, the whiskers, the arms, the ears, the body, the nose, the eyes, and the feet. Let's start with the tail. So select the tail and add a new state. On the state, we're going to set the position Y to -8. Then on the rotation, set -180, 0, and 170. Then add an event, which is a start event. Click on tail, and we're going to set the cycle, rewind, and repeat to yes. Now, let's enter play mode, and you see that the tail is kind of broken. So what we're going to do is select the tail and put it outside of the body. Let's play again, and the tail is animated correctly. Let's try to move it around, and it works. Sometimes you need to remove the object outside of the group because it won't animate properly. Next, we're going to animate the whiskers. So on hair, open it, and we have a left and a right one. So first, let's do the left one. Here, let's add a state. We're going to set the rotation Z to -10. Then let's add an event, start, set cycle, rewind, and repeat to yes. Similar on the hair right, add a state. We're going to set the rotation Z to -185. Add a start event and check cycle, rewind, and repeat. So let's test this out. We don't really see it, so I will change the isometric camera to the personal one. And now we see that the whiskers are moving. Right after that, we're going to add the state to the arms. So similar to the whiskers, the arms contains the left and the right one. So first, let's select the left. Let's add a state, and we're going to set its rotation to 88, -52, and -11. Then we're going to add a start event and toggle cycle, rewind, and repeat to yes. Then on the right arm, let's add a state. We're going to set the rotation to 88, 52, and 11. Then add an event, start, and toggle cycle, rewind, and repeat. So let's enter play mode to see if it works. You see that it is working properly. Next, let's do the ears. So very similar to the arms and the whiskers, on the left ear, let's add a state. We're going to set the Y position to 1.35 and the rotation Y to -4. Add an event. Let's toggle cycle, rewind, and repeat. Then on the right ear, let's add a state. Set the position Y to -1 and the rotation Y to 4. On start, let's toggle the cycle, rewind, and repeat. So let's enter play mode. And the ears are moving slightly. Then we have the body. So select the body, add a state. We're going to set the Z position to -1.98. Let's add an event start and cycle, rewind, and repeat to yes. This animation will basically give the impression that it is breathing. Then on the nose, let's add a state and change the Y position to 1488. Add a start event and set cycle, rewind, and repeat to yes. Let's play. Next, so on the eyes, let's add a state. We're going to set the Z scale to 0.07 and then the rotation X to 70.78. That way, it gives the impression that it is closing its eyes. Then on the event, add a start event, and here we're going to set cycle, rewind, and repeat to yes, but also the duration to 0.5 and the delay to 1.5 seconds and the delay repeat to start. Without these values, the animation of the eyes is less smooth. So let's play. And it looks good. The last body part is the feet. So here, let's select foot 1. Let's add a state. Let's set the Z position to 10. Then on the second foot, let's add a state and set the Z position to -20. For the feet, we're going to use the key down event because we want to run the animation when the WASD key are pressed. For each foot, we have to add 4 key downs event. So let's select the first one, and here I will add 4 different events. The first one, it's going to be key down, and the selected key is W. And the reason that we're doing this is because the animation has to run when the cat is moving depending on the 4 keys. And in here, we're going to set the cycle and rewind to yes. So on the other ones, select key down, then A, key down, S, key down, D. On the second foot, do the same thing. Select key down, the value is W, cycle and rewind, A, S, and finally D. Let's enter play mode, and when we move the WASD key, you see that both feet are animated. Now, let's talk about physics. Spline recently released its physics features, which allows objects to be affected by gravity. And to add it, it is fairly simple. First, we need to go on the inspector panel. On the environment settings, you will see the physics property. Let's enable that. Then let's enter play mode. Let's move the cat to the plants. And you see that nothing is happening. And the reason is because we need to talk about the body type. Similar to the cat, we need to make the environment dynamic. Let's take, for example, this plant. You see that the physics is enabled and the body type is positioned, which means that it is fixed. So let's put it to dynamic and move the plant a little bit above the floor. Let's enter play mode. And now you see that it is affected by gravity. By having dynamic enabled, there is a bunch of properties that are now available. The weight makes your object lighter or heavier. The gravity scale is useful if you have 2 similar objects to be affected differently by gravity. It is also the value that is multiplied with the gravity, which means that if your gravity scale is at 1, let's say, you can see the speed when it falls. If you put it at 2, it will fall faster. Then we have friction. Friction makes your object slide on a flat surface, similar to ice. So if your friction is 0, it will basically glide and slide. But if it's at 1, it won't. Then we have damping, which makes your object falls slower. Then we have bounce, which makes the object bounce back on collision. If bounce is at 0, you will see the object doesn't have bounciness. But if you put it to the maximum, you will see that it will bounce multiple times. I'll put it back to 0.2. Then we have the collider, which works very similar to the game control ones. It gives boundaries to your object. Translation and rotations are basically the limits to where your objects and axis can rotate or translate to. With that being said, the way the plant is falling doesn't feel natural because the stand is still attached to the plant. And here comes the children property over here. Fused will apply physics on the whole group, and separate will apply physics to each children. So here, let's set separate, then on the plant one, add dynamic, and on the stand, add dynamic. So let's play, and this feels a lot more natural. So on both children, I will set the friction to 1 and bounciness to 0. Similar for plant 1. And also for the plant 2. So on the group, set separate, and on each children, set dynamic. Friction to 1 and bounciness to 0. On this plant, I will set the Y position to -97. So let's play. And now it's kind of jiggling. So game controls also works with physics. So here, if we move the cat, you'll see that we're able to kind of push them. For the rest of the video, I will disable physics for now. Let's talk about 3D cameras and lighting. Cameras are the gadgets that captures and shows the world to the player. By customizing and controlling cameras, you will make the presentation of your game genuinely special. You can have an unlimited number of cameras in a scene. They can be set to render in any order, at any place on the screen, or only certain parts of the screen. In Spline, you can set 2 types of cameras, perspective and orthographic. The orthographic camera is commonly utilized in designing. All objects show up at the same scale, parallel lines stays parallel, and a unit of length will show up to have the same length all over on the drawing. This makes it simpler to judge relative sizes and to adjust models. The perspective camera gives you more data around depth, objects which are distance away, and those adjacent. A point of view seen by human eyes within the real world. At the top right, you see that the set camera is the personal camera. If you search in your scene personal camera, you won't find it because this one is your own hand-free camera. You should use the personal camera to work around your scene since it is your hand-free camera. In the export play settings, it is not recommended to use your personal camera. This one should be a custom camera such as the isometric camera here in your scene. This camera is the custom one that we created to view the scene from an isometric point of view. We use this camera for the export play settings since it is always in the same position. The camera controls are located at the bottom of the editor. With this feature, you can reset, select a different axis, set to isometric, or change the type of camera. If you want to view a scene from a different angle, you will really appreciate the change axis feature. There's even a zoom control. So first, let's select the cat. At the top here, you can select the zoom, center an object, then use the 400% to zoom on it. You can zoom at which depth, center to the target object, and select the object orientation from the top bar. To add a new camera, it is fairly simple. On the top bar, click on the plus button, scroll down, and you will see the camera object. Last time in game controls, we were talking about collisions, and right below collisions, we have camera follow. Basically, it moves the camera as you move your character. Using the arrow key, you can rotate your scene. So here, the first option, the selected camera that follows your character. We can choose between the isometric camera or the personal one, or none. Orient to is the way it follows your character. The position and rotation delay or the camera's acceleration, and up and down limits its rotation. In our case, we're going to set the camera follow to none because we're going to use the isometric camera and states to do some interesting transition. And if we use the isometric camera on the camera follow, it will conflict. In Spline, you can also add states to cameras. By selecting the isometric camera, you can see that we're still using the personal camera. At the bottom left, we have a preview of what the isometric camera shows. So if you use the snap to camera, it will use the positioning of this camera, but we're still using our personal camera. So use this camera, we'll change that to the isometric one. And here you see that we can add a state. So the goal is to click on the sliding doors, then to change the angle of the camera to show the office room behind it. So here, while we have states, I will use the axis here on the camera controls to view the room behind. By holding options and drag on the screen, I will hand-free camera this. Then zoom in a little bit more and center this. Just like that. So by having these values, we can see behind our scene. And here we can switch between the base state and the state. So now that our isometric camera has a state, make sure to put back personal camera. We're going to select the sliding door, add a mouse down event, set toggle to yes, and the object is going to be the isometric camera, change to state. With that done, let's play. So when we click on the sliding doors, it changes the view. Make sure that the camera follow is set to none because it will conflict with this camera state. Now let's talk about night mode. You can create a night scene by changing the ambient light and the colors of the object to achieve something like this. Although it appears difficult, trust me, we're going to use the techniques we've learned previously to achieve this. Let's talk about the trigger, which is the light switch. When we click on the light switch, we will change the colors of the object and also the ambient light. So first, let's add some hover feedback. Add a state, and on the state, we're going to change the color to 736E8D. So it is purplish. Let's put back to the base state, and on the event, let's add a mouse hover on the light switch to change to state with a duration of 0.5 seconds. To fit the environment, we're going to assign some objects a night mode state. And we have to make sure to include the object in the light switch mouse down event. So let's say, for example, the ambient light. Let's add a state, and on the state, we're going to change the color to 333 with an intensity of 3.64. So as you can see, the base state, we have a lighter color, and on the state is a darker one. When this is done, let's change the position Y on the state to 720. So when this is done, let's select the light switch. Let's add a new event for mouse down. It is toggle yes, and the first object will be the ambient light. So the ambient light would change to state, and there you go. So let's test it out. So when we click here, it changes. So let's apply the same technique for all the other objects. The second one is the wall. Select wall. Let's add a state. The state will be the color. So change it to 25, 25, 25. On the light switch, mouse down, let's add the wall with the state. And now let's play. Looks good. let's move to the third item, which is the furnitures. Let's search for furnitures, and we have the group and the shape. Make sure to select the shape. Let's add a new state, and on the color, we're going to set it to 8572C7. As you can see, the furnitures are really bluish. So go to depth. Let's set far to 480, the origin X to 3.9, and the Z to 127. Now you can see that there's a gray arrow on the scene. So let's select that and move it up a little bit until we have a nice purple and not so bluish. So I'll bring this down a little bit more, a little bit further, and voila. So let's go to the light switch right below the wall. Let's add the furnitures and let's test it out. It looks a lot better already. Next, let's change the color of the floor. In new state, let's change it to 332081. Now let's select the light switch and let's add the floor. Let's test it. All right. Next, we're going to do the wooden floor and walls. Search for wooden, and we have the wooden wall tile and the wooden floor tile. So let's take the first one, set a state, and in here, I will set the lighting to 70, image to 50, and the color to 2A2480 with an opacity of 100. For the wooden floor tile, I will do the same thing. So add a new state. On the colors, I will set the lighting to 70, image to 50, the color to 42, 3C99 with an opacity of 100. Now on the light switch, let's add two new objects and select the wooden wall tile and the wooden floor tile. Let's test it. All right, next is the second floor tile and the second floor wood. So search for a second. So these two. So the second floor wood, let's add a state, and here I will set the color to 43, 43, 97 with an opacity of 100. On the second floor tile, I will create a new state, set the lighting to 70, image to 50, and the color to 42, 3C99 at 100% opacity. On the light switch, I will add two new objects and search for the second floor. Let's test it. It's really coming along. Next is the bed frame. Search for the bed frame. Let's add a state. I will set the color to 2E2EA9 with an opacity of 100. Then on the light switch, let's add the bed frame on the mouse down. And let's test it. Make sure to test every single object so we don't lose one along the way. Then for the wood, we have a lot, but it is basically this one. It is this single shape over here. So let's add a state. On the wood, I will set the color to 8B8BBF with an opacity of 100. Don't forget to add it to the light switch. So let's add the wood over here. Let's test it out. Nice. After the wood, we have the drawers. So search for cover. And we have cover 1 TV, cover 2 TV, and cover 3 TV. So these one already have a state for the hover, but let's add another one for the night mode. So this one will have a different color. It's going to be 6E7BFF. Let's do the same for cover TV2. 6E7BFF. And the third one, 6E7BFF. Now on the light switch, let's add 3 new objects. It's going to be cover TV1, cover TV2, and cover TV3. Let's play it. All right. Next, we have the metal, which is the metal on the furnitures. Over here, let's add a state, and I will change the color to 000446 with an opacity of 100. On the light switch, let's add it, and let's search for the metal. Then we have the sliding doors. So let's search for sliding door frame. Over here, let's add a state, and the color is 34349A with an opacity of 100. And also the slider. So here I will search for slider door frame 2. 34349A with an opacity of 100. On the light switch, add 2 more objects. Search for slider door frame 2, also the sliding door frame. Let's play. And this looks already a lot better. The last object is the nightstands. Search for nightstands. Let's add a state, and I will set the color to 5959C5. Put the opacity to 100, just like that. On the light switch, do not forget to add the nightstands here. And let's play. And voila. Make sure that on the mouse down event, we have 18 objects. Let's talk about audio and sounds. The impact of sound effects on a gameplay experience is enormous. A game without sound effects will be incredibly disappointing. Even though one without music or dialogue may be able to get by without it, video game sound effects do an excellent job of establishing the tone of the area, giving hints about the surroundings, and offering some amazing fun along the way. Effective sounds can elevate a solid game to something even more fun and entertaining. But poor sound can bring a great game down a few notches. In Spline, you can play sounds with a few clicks. To add sounds is pretty simple. It is basically a play sound event. So let's take, for example, the TV. Let's add a new event, and from the drop-down, select Play Sound. Here we have a few properties. Interaction is basically play sound or pause stop sounds that are connected to other objects. When is your trigger? So mouse down or key down. For the sound file, you can upload your own custom sound, or there's a sound library, which we will be talking in a bit. Toggle sets a toggle to stop or pause the sound on your object. Volume controls the volume of the sound. Delay controls the delay of the sound. And a loop sets the sound to play a once, infinite, or a count. And right above, you will see this small icon, which is the sound libraries. This library has multiple sound effects from Spline, and to have access to the full library, you need a premium account. So I believe the first ones are completely free, such as the bell, bubble, click, jump, pop, and success. You can also find free sound effects in websites such as Sound Bible, Mixkit, free sound effects, And for gaming, we have opengameart.org. After downloading the sound, make sure the size of the file is less than 2 MB and it is a MP3 or a WAV format. In our case, I already downloaded the drawer sound and I will leave it in the assets folder below. So first, let's add some sounds to the drawers. On the search bar, search for drawer, and I will select the first one over here. Let's add an event. Select play sound, and in here, let's upload the custom drawer sound. So as you can see, it is a 30 KB size and also a MP3 format. When this is done, we can go to the library and basically make the drawer sound into a component so we can reuse this sound on other objects. So let's test it. Let's play. And when we click on this one, we have a sound. So let's apply this to the other 6 drawers. So on the second one, let's add a play sound. And you'll see that on the library, you can just select the same one. Now on this drawer, the second one here, and also on the drawers below the TV. With that done, let's enter play mode and let's test it. Next, let's add a sound to the sliding doors. So let's select the sliding doors, add a new event, select play sound, and here instead of uploading, we're going to use this sound from the library. Search for the door opening one. I think it's this one. All right, now let's play. Then we're going to add the sound to the TV. So select the TV, let's add a new event or just use the one previously made. And here I will choose the click. So it's going to be click 1. Let's enter play mode. And the last object is the iMac right here. So let's select the iMac, and similar to the TV, we're going to add a play sound event. And from the library, choose click 1. And there you go. You have a fully interactive scene. We can also add a click on the light switch. So select the light switch, and here I will also add a play sound. From the library, click 1. Let's talk about URL and embed. Without extensive coding and a framework like 3JS, it is often really hard to deploy interactive 3D scenes on a website. With Spline, you can embed your interactive 3D element on any HTML website that accepts an iframe with no scripting required. Spline provides us with a public URL, which makes the process quite simple. The most impressive feature is probably how easy it is to export your work. On the top bar, click on the export button, and here select the public URL. Make sure that the URL is auto-generated and we can just copy this link. Then on any browser, just paste the link and you will see your scene. It should interact and work the same way as in play mode. If you change some things in your scene and it is not reflecting on the browser, make sure to update by clicking on the update button here. Now let's talk about the drop-down properties. The first property is camera. This option is the selected camera used to view your scene. In our case, it is the isometric camera, but you can also change it for the personal camera. Then you have the logo, the background color, and the page scroll. You can enable or disable these options. Then we have the gesture controls. They are set to no because we're using the isometric camera, which has a fixed position. But let's set them to yes. And let's change the camera to personal camera. Do not forget to update. And let's go back on the browser. Make sure to refresh your browser, and now you will see that we can move the scene around using your mouse. We can also move it to the side, zoom in, and zoom out. And because we're using the personal camera, you will see that the isometric one won't work anymore. Back to the properties. Right after the gestures controls, we have the touch settings. This is very similar to gesture controls, but using your touch controls for touch devices, such as the phone or the iPad. Right below, we have the gesture limits. These properties add limits to the rotation and translation. Let's say, for example, on the orbit. Right below, we have event behavior, which is passed through the object or not. Compression helps with the performance, which I will talk later. Now, let's talk about Embed. So while other applications like Webflow, WordPress, and etc. use the embedded code to import your scene, we will use Notion as an example of how easy it is to import your project. On the export dropdown, copy the public URL, and in Notion, we can use the embed element and just paste the URL. And you will see that it will render our spline scene. And here we can even make it bigger. And it is fully interactive. Let's talk about how to export your work in a React website. React is the most popular JavaScript library developed by Facebook, which was used, among other things, to develop apps like Instagram. The purpose of this tool is to make it easier for developers to create fast user interfaces for websites and applications alike. We saw earlier that you could share your work with an URL and view it on a browser. So let's take it a bit further. Most people would want their spline design alongside their website design. So here's a small demo of what we're going to build. Here we have a website with interactive buttons and a scene. And I will also show you how to make your scene full screen and how to minimize it. On the top bar, click on Export, and from the drop-down, select Code. And here you will see that there's a React option. In other words, Spline and React are completely compatible. When you select it, you see that there's a URL to the scene, but also a code snippets for React. To follow this part of the tutorial, you also need the Figma design file. We will recreate this whole design from Figma in React. I will leave the link to the Figma design in the description below. The design system includes fonts, colors, components, and styles. At the bottom, we have the static web design and also the static mobile design. The plan is to separate this design into a left side and a right side. We will start with the logo, some text, some buttons, and an image. Then we're going to pass on to the spline scene with these two buttons. Then we're going to work on the functionality. So being able to click on the play game to open and have our scene full screen, and finish up with responsive design. In order to follow along with me, I highly recommend downloading or duplicating the Code Sandbox template. I will link it in the description below, but you can go to your Code Sandbox, go to Create and search template. You can search for DC Spline. And here you will see that we have two projects. We have the starting template, but we also have the final template. So that way you can compare your code. So let's click on the template. The starting template has a few things. First, it has the Spline tool, React Spline, and runtime packages. This is necessary to run 3D on your website. Then we have the styled components for the CSS styling. At the top, you see that we have a components folder. This folder contains a lot of simple layout components, such as some buttons, the header, the logo, and the play button. Then we have the Spline scene. This is the same code as what you have in Spline on the export section. Then we have some custom fonts, some images. Text styles is the same thing as in the design system in Figma. This is your design system, but in code for the fonts. And we have the smart home final Spline project for the download button. Let's start simple with the logo. At the top left, we have the logo. So here, let's import that component. So I will import logo from the components folder, and the component is called logo. Then on the HTML, we're going to remove this text and call the logo component. And then in your CSS, we're going to declare a new variable for the logo container. This variable will contain the positioning of the logo. Let's set a position absolute with a top of 44 pixels and a left of 0 pixels. And then here, let's call our new variable, the logo container. And let's insert the logo inside it. Next, we have a bunch of text. So similar to this logo container, I will create a text container. Then we have the title, and we're going to use the text style .h1. So what that means is that on the text styles.js, we already have all the fonts and font size pre-made for the CSS. So to import them, at the top, we're going to import everything as text styles from the text styles file. And to use it, so instead of using a div or a h1, we are using the styled text styles.h1. So now it takes all of this h1 styling applied to this component. Then we have a description. And this one is P. Here, just below the logo container, I will call the text container. And right here, let's use the title, which is 3D room with game controls. And then we have the description, which I will copy paste from the text. In terms of CSS, the container will have a display grid with a gap of 24 pixels. That way we're giving space to the title and the description. Then we're going to use a max width to limit the width of our content to 460 pixels. Let's add some paddings. 225 from the top, 0 right, 0 bottom, and 56 to the left. On the title, we don't really need to change or to add CSS since it is using the text styles. And for description, let's limit the text with a max width of 360 pixels. I will align text to the left, and then I will copy paste the font family to be using Inter, which is the only text on the website using Inter, and the rest is using our custom fonts over here, Gilroy. Then we have the font style, which is normal, the font weight set to 500. We have font size to 17 pixels, the line height to 21 pixels. Let's set the color with a RGBA of 0, 0, 0, at 0.6 opacity. Then I will set a margin of 0. Right after the text, we have the button containers. On the left side, we have a download button, and on the right side, we have a play button. Right after description, let's create a new variable for the button container. Right after the text container, let's call the button container. The download button and the play button are already made. So at the top, we can just import download button from components, and here we have the download button. Let's also import the play button from the components file and play button. Inside the button container, we're going to call these two new components. So first, download button and the play button. Let's go to the button container CSS. I will use a display grid. To put them side by side, I will be using a grid template column with auto and auto. We're going to use justify content start to position them to the left, and let's add a gap of 20 pixels. When this is done, you can look in the design and see that there's a background color which uses a linear gradient. So I will copy and paste it, and right after that, we can use a mixed blend mode, normal, and then let's add some paddings. 40 pixels from the top, 0 pixels to the right, 40 pixels for the bottom, and 56 pixels to the left. Then we can add a margin top of 53 pixels. When this is done, let's go to our button container and let's add the functionalities. So let's not take care of the play game now, but just the download. Let's import our smart home final.spline.zip file, which is the download file. It's going to be smart home final.spline.zip. Inside the button container, we're going to use a h tag with a href using our download file. Let's add the target blank so it opens another window, and also the rel to no refer. Inside this tag, insert your download button, and now we can click to see if it works, and it does download our file. Here you can see that the text has a underline. To remove this, let's go to our button container, and here, targeting all the A tags, use the text decoration to none. Next, right below the buttons, we have the shadow. So at the bottom over here, I will declare a new constant for the gradient line. I will set the width to 100%, the height to 48 pixels. Then I will copy paste the background color. When this is done, let's go right under the button container and put our gradient line. Next, we have the controls. So at the bottom, let's declare a new variable for the control container. And here I will put 1. The reason is because we're going to have 2 control container, but let's talk about this later on. This one is a div, and then we have the keyboard text. We're going to use a body main, so I will call that subtitle, which is the text styles using a body main. And lastly, we have the image. So let's declare a new variable for the control image, styled.image. So here, right after the gradient line, we're going to call the control container 1. Inside, we have the subtitles, and here it's going to be keyboard key. Then we have the control image. The control image has a src, which is the source of the image, and an alt. The alt is the control image. At the top, let's import that image. So it's going to be image control from, we'll search for the images folder, and it's called control.png. So in here, call the image control. At the bottom, let's add some styling. So the control container, let's just add a display block. The subtitle will have a different color. So I will be using the RGBA, which is 0, 0, 0 at 0.6 opacity. Let's add a margin top of 14 pixels and a padding left of 56. Now for the control image, I will be adding a max width of 326 pixels. Then let's add some paddings. So 14 pixels to the top, 0 to the right, 0 to the bottom, and 56 to the left. And there you go. We have the left side done. Now let's work on the right side. To make things easier to see, click on this third button over here, open in a new window, so we can see our website from a big screen. Based on the design, you can see that we have the left side, which contains the text, buttons, and controls, and the right side, the spline scene. Here, we're going to create a big container called the content wrapper, and this container will basically split the content from left to right. Then we will wrap all of these content together and call it container. So back in the code, I will declare the content wrapper, and we also have the container. The container will only have a position relative for now, and this one is going to be right after the logo container. Inside the container, I will set all of this content with Command X and paste it inside. When this is done, we're going to use the content wrapper to wrap the container as well. Then take everything inside the container and put it inside the content wrapper. When this is done, let's add some CSS to the content wrapper. We will be using a display grid, then the grid template column to separate into a left and right side. The first one is going to be auto, so we can set a 855 pixels on the spline scene. Let's use a max width of 1440 pixels. We will use the width at 100 and margin at 0 auto. On the browser, you can see that now the whole text and the buttons are taking the left side, and now we have the right side to put our spline scene. So let's go back into code, and inside of components, here we have the spline scene. Like I said earlier, this URL is basically our scene. So you can just change this link to have a new scene. So here, let's declare a new variable for the spline container. And at the top, right after the container and inside the content wrapper, let's use our spline container. And in it, we have 3 different components. The first one is the header. Next, we have the close button. And finally, we have the spline scene. So make sure to import them. So let's import the header from the components folder. And here we have header. Then we have the spline scene from the components folder. And lastly, we have the close button from the components folder as well. So let's go to the browser and let's check what we have. So as you can see, the spline scene is very minimal code to have your scene displayed on a website. Here we have the close button, so we're going to position it over here, and let's add some border radius on the scene. On the spline container, let's add a position relative. Then we're going to add some paddings. It's going to be 24 pixels from the top, 20 pixels from the right, 24 pixels for the bottom, and 0 pixels on the left. Then on the close button, so if we go to the close button, you can see that here there's a class name close button, that we can use here. So this is very similar to Sass. I will set the top to 54% and left to minus 32 pixels. So let's check. So it is a little bit off. So let's set it to maybe 52%. Similar to Spline, React has a state system called useState. The goal is to pass from a window size to full screen and vice versa. First, we need to import useState from React. So over here, we can import the useState, and then right before the return, we're going to declare our state. So isOpen is going to be our state, and set isOpen will be the trigger to our state. Is equal to the useState from React, and between parentheses is the initial value. So first, we're going to set it to false. Then on the play button, so let's take a look at the play button component. You see that it has a onClick props, which means that we can use this onClick function from the play button. And here we're going to use the trigger. So we can set isOpen to true. With that done, when you click on the play button, nothing really happens. And the reason is because the event is there and the state is changing, but we aren't changing the CSS appropriately. So let's go to the Spline container, and we need to set relative to fixed instead. And with style components, it is possible to use the isOpen state to change your CSS. So here, let's remove relative, and we're going to use props. So this one, we're going to call the same name as the state. So isOpen. If this is true, we're going to use fixed, and or else we're going to fall into relative. When this is done, we need to go to the Spline container and use the isOpen, which is the same value as the prop over here. And this value is equal to isOpen, which is the state over there. So with that done, let's refresh the page. The initial value is false. So when you click on play game, it will open. So as you can see on the bigger screen, first let's refresh. We have a few problems, which is some paddings, and it doesn't take the full size of the screen. So let's go back to the Spline container. So for the paddings, we're going to do the same thing. So let's take the props is equal to the props.isOpen. And if this value is true, we're going to set to 0, or else we're going to take the previous values. Then we're going to set the top to 0, left to 0, bottom to 0, and the right to 0. And also use the overflow to auto. Let's go back to the browser, and when we click on play, you can see that it is finally taking the full size of the screen. The problem is we have no way of going back. So let's refresh, and here we're going to add the border radius. So in our components, here the Spline scene has a class name of Spline. So by using this class name, set the border radius, and here we can also use the props dot isOpen. So if the screen is full screen and is open, we're going to set the border radius to 0, or else we're going to set it to 20 pixels. Then we're going to add the close button. If we go back to the close button file, you can see that we have a isOpen props. So what it means is that here we're using this condition to show the close icon. So let's search for the close button, and in here we're going to do the same thing. So use the isOpen props to the isOpen state, and it also has an onClick function. So the onClick will do the exact opposite of the play button, which is to close it. So set isOpen to false. So let's test it out. Now our scene has a border radius. The scene is working well. And when you click on the play, it opens and it shows the X to close it. With that done, let's talk about responsiveness. It is really important to think about how your website will look like on a smaller screen. If it is not adaptive, your website will break at a certain screen size. To fix this issue, we will use media queries. There's 3 screen sizes that we have to take into consideration: over 1400 pixels, below 560 pixels, in between. So at 1400 pixels, the layout changes from left to right side to a single column. When this happens, we need to change the position of the close buttons. The text container will have less paddings, and we will remove the gradient. So let's take a look at the current website. On your inspector, we can see that there's different screen sizes. The website was designed at 1440, which is the screen size of a laptop. Then as you go smaller and smaller, you can see that the layout is broken. Then on a mobile, it doesn't work well. So let's fix that. So first, let's fix it at a 1024 pixels. Let's go to the content wrapper. We're going to add a media query, which will set the max width at 1400 pixels. Which means that when the screen goes to 1400 pixels and lower, it's going to change the CSS. We're going to set the grid template column to 1 fraction instead. Also align content to be center and add a padding bottom of 40 pixels. So now you can see that instead of having the scene on the right side, the scene is at the bottom. Then on the Spline container, we will also add a media query at 1400 pixels to set the paddings to props dot is open, and this one will have 0 pixels, or 0 from the top, 20 from the sides, and 10 at the bottom. We will also change the position of the close button. So here, let's use the close button. The top is minus 44 pixels. Left is 50%, which we will remove from the margin left, the half of the size of the button, which is minus 50 pixels. And we're going to transform, rotate 90 degrees. And on the gradient line, let's add a media query. And this one we're going to remove completely from the website. And lastly, because this keyboard keys is supposed to be below the scene, we're going to also remove it. So here, let's add a media query with a max width of 1400 pixels and display none. So let's test the website. So this is what it looks like. And as we go smaller, the layout changes. So as you can see, sometimes it breaks, but this is because of the joysticks. So just refresh your browser. All right, this looks good. And the next point where it is broken, it's around 560, around here. So let's refresh. So from this point, we're going to change this layout to put the play button just below the download one. But first, let's take care of the second controls. So in the design, you can see that the controls are below the scene. And there's multiple ways to go about this. But I think the most understandable one is to add a second controls in your HTML and to do the complete opposite with this first container. So right after the first one over here, declare a new container for the control container, and I will name it 2. So here we're going to display none at first, and then using the media query, 1400, we will display block. Then just right at the end, so this is after the content wrapper. So here I will add the controls container 2, or we can just copy the first one and then change 1 to 2 instead. So maybe we can add it right inside of the content wrapper. Lastly, we're going to take care of the mobile responsiveness. So at a smaller screen size, the text container will have even less paddings. On the button container, we will change the layout to be a single column, and we will reduce the paddings on the subtitles and on the image. So let's go to the text container, and we will add a media query for 560 pixels. We will set the paddings to be 145, 20 on the side, and 0 at the bottom. So that way, we have less padding from the top. Next, on the button container, for 560 pixels, this one will have a grid template column to auto, and let's center it with a justify content, center, justify items, center, align content, center, and the paddings to be 32 pixels and 20. We can add a margin top of 40 pixels, which is less than 53. Then on the subtitles, let's add a media query for 560 pixels. Let's change the paddings to 8 pixels vertically and 20 pixels horizontally. And last, on the image. And I will set the paddings to 8 pixels vertically and 20 pixels horizontally. So now it works. So we have our scene, and the buttons are interactive. We can make it bigger, and also it works on mobile. And when we close, you can see that it works on the bigger screen, but also on a smaller screen. And like I said, if everything seems broken, don't worry. This is because of the Spline's joysticks. So let's refresh, and your website should work. Let's talk about performance and 3D vitals. The performance of a scene can make or break the experience. Imagine loading your scene on your website and it takes over 20 seconds to load. This is a really bad experience. An optimized scene feels smooth and responsive, and it will attract a larger audience. Spline has an integrated performance monitor called 3D Vitals. With this feature, you will be able to keep the performance of the scene fast and efficient by providing some key metrics. You will see an overview of your scene. The export size is the size of your scene. If this value is really high, expect the loading time to be high as well. Right below, we have the matrix. It gives you a summary of what you have on your scene. So the amount of objects, polygons, materials, audio assets, lights, post processors, and textures. The export size and loading time are estimates based on a slow internet connections, so actual values may vary. Opportunities follows metrics, which are suggestions for improvement with actions within them based on the current state. Here, you see that at the top, we have the red check on materials. So in opportunities, it says that we have a high amount of materials, and this can impact the loading time and the frame rate. The goal is to have the green check everywhere. We highly recommend you to always double check assets that you bring to Spline, such as images, audios, and also 3D objects from other softwares. For images, like this one, always optimize them and try to keep the size low so it does not affect the loading time. For audios, let's say for example the drawer, do not exceed 2 MB and try using sounds from the sounds library instead. Be mindful of the amounts of objects in your scene and put a limit. So for example, if you know that a certain object in your scene, let's say for example this plant, has a lot of polygons and materials, well, limit to 1 or 2 and do not put more. Another metric that is very important is the lights. Each object in your scene has the shadow property. Let's say for example the floor. and it can cast or receive shadows, and this is performance heavy. So make sure to limit the amount of lights in your scene and which object to be affected by it or not. Try working with less than 3 lights per scene. In this process, you might have an object in your scene that is performance heavy and you can't find it or you don't know which one it is. I highly recommend isolating each object in another file and running the test on each of them. So let's take, for example, select this plant and you want to know what is the matrix on this object. So let's copy it, create a new file such as this one, remove this and just paste your plant. Then go to export and run test. So now you see that this plant is not performance heavy. It has 7 objects, 666 polygons, 4 materials, and the rest seems fine. If you think each object is too slow, you can also just select a whole floor. Paste it and run the test. And here you see that we have a materials problem. And this is how you quickly fix performance issues in Spline. This is the end of this video. I hope that you really enjoyed making this awesome scene in Spline with me, and I will see you in the next project.